Everyone has a story to tell. Welcome to DingoTalk, where we explore the experiences that make us who we are. Here's your host, Carlo Guadagnino.
What's going on, Chuckleheads? I am Carlo Guadagnino. This is DingoTalk, and this week we are not going to be talking about Division III football, as today is the NFL Draft. So we're going back to our roots here at DingoTalk. If you go back into the vault, you can see how this show started, which was a microphone, a beer can, and me talking about the NFL Draft about 2 years ago. This week, we are joined by Alan Saunders, beat writer for the Pitt Panthers, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Pittsburgh Pirates. Pretty much, and as you're going to find out as we do this interview, there is not a sport in Pittsburgh that Alan has not covered to an almost in-depth level. Even last year, getting in some Riverhound soccer because it's a sport that he wasn't as comfortable talking about. So he took himself outside of that comfort zone. Before we get any further into that, TikTok, the social medias, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. The only one different is Instagram. You got a dingo_talk. If you're watching us on YouTube, thank you. Hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe. Don't miss an episode. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else that you listen to our podcast, please, again, hit the like button, little notification bell so you don't miss anything. But we're going to talk to Alan Saunders about being a Pittsburgh kid coming from Penn Trafford, going to IUP, and everywhere that's taken him. We're also going to obviously talk about where he expects the Steelers to go with the draft being today. And we're going to talk a little bit of Pirates, a little bit of Pitt Panthers, and a hodgepodge of other things. So without further ado, welcome to the Dingo Talk Draft Special, and here is Alan Saunders. Chuckleheads, I am Carlo Guadagnino. This is Dingo Talk, and it's a very special episode of Dingo Talk as we return to our roots for the first time in 2 years. We're going to talk about the draft as this is coming out on draft day. I'm joined by Alan Saunders, and the best way to describe, as I did in this first go-round of this, it'd be better to tell you what he doesn't cover, which I believe might be the Pittsburgh Riverhounds, and even then you might still be...
I've done it. I covered them last year for one match, so yeah, it counts. Basically everything in Pittsburgh you can do, I've done at least once. That's been the goal. So yeah,
an East Hills guy. So it's nice to have another guy from the east side of Pittsburgh. You know, us guys, we don't really see each other very often. You're born and raised in Monroeville, Penn Trafford. So let's talk about why the choice to, when you graduated from Penn Trafford, why was IUP the choice?
It wasn't the first choice. I actually went to Gettysburg College my freshman year, and I thought I wanted to study history. Turns out I didn't want to study history. Learned that. They taught me that very well, and I still love history. I've actually been reading this incredible history on the Civil War written by Shelby Foote. It's this 3 massive volume, like 2,000 to 3,000 page books, and it's been a bear, but I do a lot of traveling, so that's been my friend on the airplane recently. Still love history, but wasn't a job for me. Didn't really know what a job for me was going to be, and just kind of wanted to get through it and get into working, and I did that, and stumbled upon where I'm at now sort of accidentally.
Well, so let's dive into that. How did you decide, once you got through kind of the rigmarole of being a college student, trying to figure out what the next steps were going to be, why did you decide to become a writer and be involved in covering sports?
I didn't really decide, I guess is the best way to answer that question. I've always been a sports lover since as long as I can remember. Grew up obviously a big Pittsburgh sports fan. If you're from Pittsburgh, that's everybody. But great family connection to sports. I think that was the big thing. My mom was a big hockey fan. My godmother had Penguin season tickets. Both of my uncles, huge Pitt fans and Steelers fans. And so I just had that from a very young age. I can remember my grandfather taking me to Three River Stadium, probably 6, that was a big part of me. And so sports was always something that I was very interested in. I was not a professional athlete, as most people are, and I didn't ever think that sports as a career was realistic. I tried to always find things that were somehow connected to sports. I started my own business working in fitness equipment. We actually worked for the Steelers for a little bit, helped build them with their new weight facility there at the UPMC Rooney Sports Complex. Made a lot of good connections that way, but really physical work and not something I felt like I was going to be able to do for the rest of my life. And so I kind of decided like I was going to go back to school. I was going to try to find something else. I don't know, maybe teach. I didn't really have a plan, and I just needed something else to do while I was going back to school. And I had a friend in the journalism business, said, hey, we're looking for somebody, think you might be able to help. I had done a little bit of sports writing when I was in college, just as a thing to do. I said, I think I can do this. And it just sort of went from there. It became a career. I loved it. I remember falling in love with it. I think that was the big thing. I was always a kid that didn't know what he wanted to be when he grew up. Like that question was hard for me. Even through high school, I really wasn't sure. Into college, I wasn't sure. I didn't have any idea really. It wasn't really until I had done the job for a little bit that I got the bug for it, and I kind of fell in love with it. And I realized, hey, this is what I want to do. And then it was just a ton of hard work from there. I mean, it is a brutally difficult industry to break into, but it once I really decided that that's what I want to do, that was maybe 2012 or 2013. That's when I really first kind of put my full effort into deciding this was going to be a career for me. And it's a weird path and not the one that most people take, but it's one that's out there if you are willing to work hard enough.
Now, was writing something that you enjoyed doing before you got specifically into like writing about sports, or was that part of that you kind of got the bug and it kind of snowballed from there?
I would say I always felt like I was a good writer, but I didn't really have a reason to. Like if I had an assignment for a class and it's, I was always the kid, I give me a 5-paragraph essay instead of a test. I felt like that was a good way to express myself. But I didn't have anything that I was passionate enough to be writing about consistently. A friend of mine, also from the same high school, he writes like poetry and submits things to Reader's Digest, and I'm always amazed at the ability to have writing is hard work, and to have that process without a topic that you're necessarily attached to me feels so much more difficult. I always feel like you have to be a journalist first and a sports fan second, and that's true, but I couldn't do this job writing about like house fires. I have so much admiration for people that are news journalists, specifically because to me that is far more difficult than what I do, where I just get to write about something I love every day, and like maybe there's bad stories, but I'm still at the end of the day writing about a game. And to me, it's just a lot easier than the other part of this job.
Well, and I think that's something people don't necessarily think about when you're thinking about the guy that writes for the Post-Gazette or the Trib, and they're writing the article about, Joe Biden or what's going on in the city of Pittsburgh. More difficult than being a sports fan and being able to sit there and say, oh, we both watched the game. Well, here's my opinion of the game, and then this is what happened. And so it's just a different track mind when you're talking about writing about sports as opposed to the other things that come down the line as a writer.
It's very humbling as I freelance for the Associated Press, and you log into the back end of the where you submit your articles, and I can see all the other stories that are coming in the wire, and it's like protesters being killed in Iran, and war correspondents submitting stuff from Ukraine, and even in this country, school shooting or whatever's at the top of the news. And then here's my 300 words about the Pittsburgh Pirates. I almost, you feel like you don't matter, and you don't. But honestly, I think it's a good perspective to have. It is just sports at the end of the day. It's some people's livelihoods, but it's very rarely someone's life and death. And I think you do have to treat it with a level of seriousness because of the money that's involved and because it really is people's livelihoods. But it is also frequently pales in comparison to what happens in the rest of our world, and should be treated with a proper amount of levity. I feel like I try to do that in my coverage. It's like, let's remember why we're all here. We're watching grown men play a kids game, or women. This week was a big week for women's sports. Yeah, that's what we're doing, right? We're playing around. We are having endless debates about playground insults back and forth on the basketball court, right? So like, let's just take it easy a little bit. That's kind of why I try to center my coverage.
Well, and I always find it amusing when the whole point of sports is that for the hour or the 2 hours that you're watching that, nothing, you don't have to worry about anything else. You're just watching adults play a sport that you may or may not have played as a kid. They're just getting paid quite handsomely to do it. Let's not make it into a bigger to do. I guess the next question would be, how did you, when you got out and you started, now this is what I'm going to do. How did you start putting work out outlets to try to get your stuff picked up?
I just never said no to any opportunity. At first, I actually sought out opportunities to do stuff that was different. Oh, we joked earlier about like try to do everything. Like I love, like, hockey was my sport growing up. To me, it's like the one I was somewhat good at. It's the one I still play to this day when I can. But I knew that like I didn't want to leave Pittsburgh. In journalism, if you have the ability to be mobile, you give yourself so much more of a chance for advancement, right? I mean, there's only so many jobs in so many cities, and so many people that I know and respect in this business move on to other places very quickly because that's the fastest way to move up. I knew for me personally, that just wasn't going to be an option. I wanted to stay in Pittsburgh, so I couldn't limit myself to just Pittsburgh hockey. That's 8 jobs. Like you got to be able to do more than that. And so I just tried to spread myself around as much as I could. You mentioned the Riverhounds. Actually, I was covering hockey, and it's the summertime, and I just volunteered. I was like, hey, I want to go cover some soccer. I've never done it before. I like soccer. I don't really know that much about it. I'd like to learn. I want to know how to do it. I want to experience something different. And I feel like that has been one of my touchstones throughout my career, is that I always try to find new opportunities. I've always been willing to accept any assignment and try to do different things. This is a industry where things change very rapidly, and you never know where you're going to need to know someone, or what skill you're going to need to have that you didn't know that you're going to need to have in 6 months or a year. I've only been doing this a decade. The job has changed so much in that span. I assume it will continue to change at that rate. And I think being well-rounded gives you not just more opportunities, but better perspective on the way things are going and how you might be a better journalist overall. I think that was always something I tried to do. And one of my great compliments I was covering, I don't know, it was a high school football game or something like that. And I had a reader say, it's like, if there's any sporting event in Western Pennsylvania, chances are Alan Saunders has covered it. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what I was going for. I'm glad you picked it up. Like that is, that's been the goal. And
glad you're picking up on what I'm putting down.
Yeah. I'm glad someone else is seeing it. That's good, because to me, that was the way forward. And maybe if I had decided what I wanted to do in high school and had gone to school specifically for journalism, and I went to, Syracuse or Waynesburg or somewhere that specializes in those things, and I had, made that the plan from day one, things would have been very different for me. But I'm very happy with the way things turned out, and I like my path, and it's fun and unique, and I still get to do random strange things from now and again, just cause, that's the way I am.
You brought up being from Pittsburgh. You went to Penn Trafford. You're from Monroeville. There's one time a year, we talked about it when we first touched base about getting you on the show. There's one time a year, I imagine, in Western Pennsylvania that your job is 165 days crammed into like 8 weeks or 12 weeks with Steeler football, Pitt football, and there's 6 classifications of high schools to cover. Is there a specific? Is it Friday night? Is it Saturday? Or is it Sunday? And I assume I know the answer to this, but I could be wrong. Which one do you enjoy covering the most?
Oh, that's a really difficult question. I think I uh man. The thing I like about I think they all have their moments. I don't think anybody beats the pageantry of college football. I think to me that is sort of the peak of our sport when you go to the backyard brawl, when you go cover Pitt, Penn State, Army, Navy, Ohio State, Michigan. Nothing the NFL does touches that to me. But I have this love-hate relationship with college sports where it has this great pageantry, these great events, but also from a media perspective, very difficult to cover, very closed in access and an attitude towards the media, extremely backward in my opinion. I don't think it does anyone any good throughout the process, but I think the coaches have far too much say in the matter compared to their administrators. I love the ability in the NFL for me to walk in the locker room on a Wednesday and strike up a conversation with someone that goes beyond sports, where we can actually bond and create a relationship between the reporter and the player. I think that makes everyone's coverage so much better when I have an understanding of what a person is like beyond just the player, and they understand where I'm like and where I'm coming from. And I think a lot of the antagonism you see sometimes between media and the people that they cover happens because they don't know each other and we don't know where each other's coming from. One of the things I used to say to recruits a lot of the times, you're coming to a new school, I'm going to interview you, we're going to talk, and it's like, hey, if you do this good, I'm going to cover you for the rest of your career. I'll cover you through college and I'll cover you all the way through the NFL. Hopefully I'll cover you going into Canton someday. It's like, on the other hand, if you get arrested, I'm gonna be the one to write about it. If you screw up, if you make the play that costs your team the game, I'm gonna be the one that has to write about it. And I don't like that part of my job, but there's part of your job that you probably don't like too. This is just what it is. Like, I think building that understanding makes everything so much better, and you're able to do that at the NFL level more than you are anywhere else, just because of the access you have to the players. High school football, there's just something special about it. I think especially in places where it means a lot, like Western Pennsylvania. Maybe it's not the same everywhere. Sure it is in like Texas and other places, Florida, where high school football is a big deal. But where high school football is a big deal, there is just something very special about covering high school football on a Friday night. So I think it's the thing to me that is very comfortable, and I think, like, maybe someday I won't do this all the time and I'll have a different job, or maybe I'll be I don't know, but like I'd still like to do that every once in a while, just because like I could see myself like 75 years old, trying to hang on in this business. Like I'll just do one high school football game a week. It's just a lot. It's all the great fun of being a sports writer is plays out on Friday night football fields.
Well, and it's interesting you bring that up about the trying to hang on. A very staple, I would say, to Pittsburgh football that had taken he stepped away, he was done, and now KDKA kind of worked him back into the radio, and we got the Fedco zone again, and there's just something about, like you said, there's something about high school football. I'm a little surprised that with the college and the NFL. I guess my wanted to wrap that up was, does social media affect relationships with players depending, and does it change from the college game to because obviously the high school kid see something on social media, you've already flipped through it 6 times and you're not worried about it. College and the pros, I feel like, is there more, you got to be a little careful with what you say, or like you said, they kind of know it's going to be a both sided. I'm not going to tell just one side of the story. I'm going to tell both.
I think I think players were a lot more able to tune out opinions about themselves when it wasn't on their phone all the time. Like, it's one thing to not pick up the newspaper, to not turn on talk radio, to not turn on a TV show like The Final Word we have on Channel 11. It's easy to decide not to engage in those things. It's different when it's showing up in your social media mentions, right? And so I think it's made for a lot more awareness of what we're saying about the players. And I think, to me, I've never considered that to be a negative. I think it means you can't talk out of your butt, right? Like you better I might be talking to my friend Tim from high school on Twitter, but if I'm talking about a player, I better be doing it knowledgeably and from a place of professionalism. And I think that's always been the way I've treated social media. And so I don't think it's been an issue for me, but I think it's tough for some people. You better have a take that you can back up when you go in the locker room or you're in the press room the next time you see that guy, or things could get uncomfortable. It's never been that way for me. I've never had a player that I couldn't get along with, or, I mean, listen, there's guys you don't like. There's guys that don't want to be in part of the process. There's guys that don't want to be interviewed, but I've never had a player come up to me about something I said or something I did publicly and they had an issue with it. In fact, many times it's been the opposite. I've had a lot of players come up to me and say, hey, look, I don't want to say this because it makes my teammate look bad, but thank you for recognizing who screwed up on that play and who didn't. And it wasn't me, right? Like a player that didn't make the mistake is getting blamed for it. He's not gonna be like, no, it was that guy over there. Like, he's not a bad teammate, but he will appreciate somebody else saying, actually, I think the responsibility lies over here. So like, there's some good and some bad to it. I've never had an issue with it. I think it's made covering players much more interesting. You have to really dig to get pieces of their personality that the public hasn't seen before. That didn't used to be the case. So I think it's made that part of the job a little bit more difficult, but I'm not complaining. I don't mind it.
Well, and so you did time with DK Sports, and now as you just brought up, the card on Channel 11 on Sundays, correct?
Yep.
And that's DK as well now, right? He's he was in there. He's not anymore. That's right. I forgot that. So, but what was it like working with DK Sports, and then what's it like over on Channel 11?
I mean, it's two totally different outlets. What DK is doing is an interesting model of journalism that I think is in many ways become an industry standard that was not before. TV is, look, I work there one day a week, maybe, twice a month. It's something fun to do. I get recognized by people on the street more than I used to because my face is all the way across their TV screen instead of, in a tiny little corner of the byline. But that's not what I'm all about. I mean, I like doing it, but I've always felt like my biggest contributions can be through the written word and through explaining things to people in a way that I feel like I can connect with them. And but it's fun. I will say that it's fun. It's fun to do, and I really like the people I work with at Channel 11. Jenna Harner and Albie Oxenreiter have been great to work with, and they're pros. And so I don't have a face for TV, so I must be saying some good stuff. Otherwise, they wouldn't have me on. That's what I was.
So you're saying you have a face for radio?
I have a face for radio and a voice for print. That's
I'm learning. I had Jim Colony on a couple weeks ago, and I'm learning this as I talk to some of these sports broadcasters and the writers and whatnot. There's a lot of self-deprecating humor that comes out of you guys. Like between you and the Division III football coaches, there's just, I don't know when I'm supposed to. There's a comment, and I'm like, oh, I didn't think to say that.
You can't take yourself too seriously in this job. If you're gonna go nuts if you do. I really think so. I think, that's just being centered on what it is. It's sports. It's fun. If you can't poke fun at yourself, somebody else is gonna anyway. You may as well. I don't ever hide from any of my flaws, and there are many. And like I said, I'm very blessed to feel like that I got that opportunity to be on Channel 11, and despite my obvious television shortcomings, that they keep having me back.
So let's get you into more comfortable than just talking about your life so far. I want to talk football, Pitt basketball, and obviously, since we are on the draft show, we're going to preview tonight's day. So, football, would you say this year it set back for a step back from the previous year? Was it kind of they stayed even, or were there strides made that maybe didn't show up in a couple games?
I think they took a little bit of a step back. They had an opportunity to have as good of a season as they had before, and they weren't able to take advantage of it. They didn't get very good quarterback play. They were a little banged up. I think that was an underrated part of what happened for them. But I mean, I think they sort of established that 2021 with Kenny Pickett was not a fluke. And they did it because they go out and win 9 games, even though they didn't get very good quarterback play at all. I think most of the time in college, if you have good quarterback play, you should feel pretty good about yourself. If you don't, you're really gonna have to work hard for every win. And Pitt got pretty miserable quarterback play last year on the whole. And to win 9 games and to go win a bowl game, I think they showed that they have a pretty high floor, that they've raised the floor of the program. Now, they didn't reach their ceiling last year, right? And so it's a little bit of both, right? They did prove something, but they also left some meat on the bone. I'm very excited to see what they can do this year. I think they're pretty well poised, but they bring most of their team back. I mean, they're losing Kalijah, but let me tell you about this Pitt defensive line. They just reload. There's just more guys. They have a ton of guys. And what Charlie Partridge and Pat Narduzzi and Randy Bates have done with that unit is really become a calling card of that program. So Kalijah, very good player, going to be a first-round pick. Haba Baldonado, going to get drafted for sure. Somewhere in the third day probably. To me, they're at the point with that defensive line where losing 2 draft picks is not a big deal. They're just roll right through that. Might have a little more trouble with safety and the linebacker. They lost their both starting safeties and middle linebacker. But I think they're in pretty good shape. And the ACC as a whole is a lot of teams that can be beat. I don't think there's somebody outside of Clemson who they don't play this year that they should feel like they can't compete with year in and year out. That doesn't mean they're going to win all the games, but they belong on the field with everybody. And they got a challenging schedule. They play Cincinnati, they play West Virginia, they play Notre Dame. Should be a really fun season for Pitt football, and going to see Kalijah name called very early in this draft process.
And on the other side of the ball, there's another kid coming home. I think I saw a report earlier this week that there is a very hotly contested battle for number 2. Nobody was named in that number 1 spot, but I think the presumption is that it's Phil.
If you have a contested battle for number 2, that means you know who number 1 is. It's going to be Phil Dracovic coming back to Pittsburgh from Pine Richland by way of Boston College and Notre Dame. A really interesting guy. I mean, I think there was a point over his career where he was talked about as a potential first-round draft pick. It's got some mechanical issues that I think probably still need ironed out, but the big one is he wasn't healthy, and especially last season at Boston College. I think that's what really held him back. If he can stay healthy, he gets reunited with Frank Cignetti, who was his offensive coordinator his first year at BC. I think he has the chance to put himself in the conversation to be talked about this time next year. I really do. And they got the transfer of Kevin Veer from Penn State. I think he's the future there too. I think they've already got it figured out beyond 2023. So that's a pretty good place to be at the most important position in football for Pitt right now.
And you brought up the backyard brawl. How important the backyard brawl, and I guess that Pitt Penn State game that we kind of got spoiled there for a couple years, and then they took it away. The WVU, the backyard brawl, I think, if I'm right, they'll play it this year, and then they're going to take a break from it as well. So what is the importance of those 2 rivalries to the program?
I think they have 3 games left in the backyard brawl. They might not all be consecutive, but I think they have 3 games left in this contract. What do they mean right now? I think that's a hard question to answer. They don't mean as much as they did. That's pretty clear. I think they're a really good way to inject some enthusiasm to the beginning of college football season for teams that might not have it with their conference schedule. But let's be honest. Do Pitt fans really care about North Carolina, Wake Forest, Georgia Tech?
No.
Well, they don't care. They're much more excited about West Virginia, Cincinnati, and Notre Dame than they are most of the conference schedule. I mean, they got Virginia Tech, they got Miami, who are, Syracuse, a Boston College teams have been playing for a long time. But like, let's be real. Those three games, Syracuse, West Virginia, Cincinnati, and Notre Dame, mean a lot more to the Pitt fan base than the rest of that whole schedule, even though they're the non-conference games. Maybe that's not the case for everyone. I think you can make an argument that for Penn State, where they want to go, and having those two teams, Michigan and Ohio State, in their way, I think that sort of provides those big games for them in a way that maybe Pitt and West Virginia don't necessarily have. I mean, if West Virginia has a good year, they can win the Big 12. Who's the big bad team there now? Baylor, Oklahoma State? I don't know.
I don't know.
I guess Pitt could feel that way about Clemson, but that played them 3 times in 7 years in the ACC. So, I think maybe it's a little bit different for Penn State in what they mean now. What they meant, though, to me is more interesting, and what they will mean. And I think those are connected. These rivalries are why college football is what it is. They are what made the sport popular. They are what provided the windfall financially that all these schools have been trying to figure out how to divvy up. If you say the Big Ten football rights are worth $1 billion, then that means that Ohio State, Michigan is worth like $750 million because all the rest of them aren't worth much, right? No. I mean, nobody's paying for Rutgers, Purdue. Okay, that's it. That's not worth anything. So I think those are, that's what the sport is all about. And when you lose them, it devalues the entire product. And I think college football has been on this path of continuing down that road where we have fewer and fewer of these traditional rivalries, which means we have fewer and fewer of these games that matter to everyone. We're going to have, it's not just Rutgers, Purdue now. Now Purdue gets to play UCLA too. Whoop-de-doo. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about that game. Right. And so we've built these super conferences. The TV money is drying up. If you understand the business model, it's going away. It's going away and it's not coming back. As print has learned very, very painfully as it transitioned from its traditional modes of distribution to solely being on the internet, there's less money on the internet. Television is about to figure that out in a very, very public and painful way. And these giant TV deals that have driven all of the moves that college sports have made over the last 20 years, they're going to go away too. And I think we're going to see the revival of the import of these games because you're going to have these games that are being played that don't matter, and they're only doing it for money that's not coming anymore. If the TV checks dry up, are we still going to play Rutgers, Nebraska? No, we're not. We're going to go back to Nebraska playing Colorado and playing Missouri and playing Kansas and playing Iowa and playing Iowa State. That's the way it's meant to be. I think we're headed back that way, and I think these games will eventually mean more. But in the meantime, we're kind of stuck in this limbo. I really think the athletic directors that are looking with a long lens, and you schedule out so far in college sports, should realize, look at what's happening in Major League Baseball. If TV can shut off the faucet to Major League Baseball, they can shut off the faucet to you too. It is coming. You better have something in your inventory that people actually want to see.
I don't think I looked at it that way, but wow, if they can shut baseball off and you get 162 of those games, why wouldn't they shut off for these 12 games that they're paying out of their backs? We'll say it that way. So we talked about Pitt football. Let's move to that team in Oakland that I think caught a lot of people by surprise this year. If I remember correctly, at the beginning of the season, there were calls that it was time. Jeff we're gonna walk him out the door. Here's your lovely parting gift and your watch, and please don't come back type thing. What really made this team special this year, and what was it about? Was it just that time of Coach Capel's finally getting things to be on his track, or just elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think the issues that Pitt had with Jeff Capel early in his tenure, they were an interesting combination of problems that didn't seem likely to be replicated. He was getting good players. He was getting better players than Pitt had been getting. And they just weren't fitting together right. He wasn't getting the right personalities. He wasn't necessarily getting the right combination of talent. I think he reached for some guys and went after the best talent, but he kind of ignored the personality part of it. And it backfired in a big way. They had some teams that just fell apart down the stretch. I think mostly because they didn't like each other. I mean, I really think that was like the big problem with those teams. The team legitimately just did not like each other. They did not fit together. And, he didn't inherit anything. And so he had no leadership structure in place to bring young guys onto the team and have them, instead of, to have them assimilate to, right? He had no team culture to bring guys into. And he really struggled with that part of it, I think. And that's why, you see, Audis Tony's in the G League. Justin Champagne just got signed in the NBA. Pretty sure Xavier Johnson's going to end up there. Trey McGowan's has been there. All those guys are on those teams ended up being good basketball players. They are good basketball players. They just didn't fit together. And so I think his end round around that was, okay, we're good at identifying talent and we're good at getting talent. Let's get more mature talent. And he went after the transfer portal in a different way and found some older, more experienced guys and said, okay, now maybe I have some guys that are mature enough that if they don't like each other, we can still play basketball together. Or hopefully they will like each other. And I think this team did. But even if they don't, they're mature enough that we can get through it. And then when we bring in young guys, and maybe even troubled young guys, as we saw with Dior Johnson, that there's a team culture that those young players can assimilate to, and that you can hope that they will embrace, and you can fix your problems. You can still now go get high athletic guys that you can hope on and bring them into a team culture that can make them better while they make your team better. So I think that was the thing that they were missing. And I think that's why guys like Nelly Cummings, guys like Jamarius Burton, who brought that culture and that experience and that just sort of toughness that comes with having been there and done that. I think that was so crucial to what that team put together. And hopefully, the team can build off that and continue that culture and carry it on. He's got some more work to do in the portal. The sort of downside of that strategy is you don't get those guys for 4 years, right? You had most of them for 1 or 2. You got to keep repeating the process. So he's got some work to do in the transfer portal, but I like the change in culture. To me, I think is the big story from this Pitt basketball season. And I think that's the big reason they got so much better results.
Now, when you got to the halfway point of this basketball season, did you think there was something? Could you see the difference in this team from the previous teams?
I thought from the very beginning that they were going to be a lot better this year. I just felt like they had a higher floor. Even I was at the West Virginia game and they got just creamed. And I remember I was sitting there, George Mikulowski's our basketball writer at Pittsburgh Sports Now. I was talking to him, was like, this doesn't change my mind about this team. They're better than this final score and they're going to be okay. And they were, and I don't think I expected them to be, making it to the second round of the tournament then, but I expected them to be like going to the ACC tournament with something to play for. Like, I felt like that was where this team should be. I think they overachieved that a little bit, but not a lot. Like, that's about where I thought this Pitt team should be. And, we'll see what they're able to put together to see how they can build on that or not. But I think that I wasn't totally surprised by them ending up where they did. Now, there was a point where we were talking about them like maybe they were, like a 6 or 7 seed. I think that probably would have been a very big surprise to me. And so maybe they like briefly, seriously exceeded my expectations before coming back to just meeting them.
So, and during the Xavier game, I think we saw different tournament Pitt team. I mean, Xavier, I don't think at any point in time they were completely in control of that game. I mean, there was a lot of foul trouble. There was a lot of things that happened, but you're watching this team that, okay, we're going to come down, we're going to shoot, and we're just going to play basketball. And if it doesn't work out, it didn't seem, you couldn't visibly see players being upset or kind of scoreboard watching. They just kind of seemed to play the game. Whereas in past years, as you said, there just seemed to be more of that scoreboard watching and how many points do I have and et cetera. So it seemed that, and like you said, the culture has changed. Moving on to what today is, it's draft day. I had Coach Terry Smith on a couple weeks ago, and he maybe hinted that we could see a cornerback from Penn State maybe make his way into that 17 spot. Where do you see the Steelers going? Is it the offensive line? Is it the defensive line? I mean, Cam's getting a little up there in age. Where do you see the Steelers going, especially after Omar Khan has been so active in free agency, which as a lifelong Steeler fan, can't remember a time that they were this active in free agency.
Yeah, I think Omar's done a really nice job of covering all the bases. I don't think there's a position they feel like they should need to draft. I think there's a lot of positions they might want to draft. That's generally the best place to be. I think there are still a lot of places where this team can be better. I think they can be better at tackle. I don't think they should be. What did Mike Tomlin say with the owners meeting? He said, I'm comfortable, but I'm not happy. I think that's a good way to look at it. Like if those two guys got to play this year, talking about Chooks Okorafor and Dan Moore, like, okay, they can play. We've seen them play, but I'm not happy with them either. You know, they need to be better. I think slot receiver, I think slot corner, I think, you know, coverage linebacker are some areas where the players on the team could be better. They're also, and I really think that if you look back in time at the very best Steelers teams, I think they drafted ahead of their needs. I think that was the very best the Steelers ever were. Troy Polamalu didn't play his rookie year. Troy Polamalu was one of the best athletes and most instinctive players at his position ever. I bet you could have taken Troy Polamalu from 10th grade and thrown him onto the NFL field and had it done okay, right? But the Steelers were so built up that they drafted Troy Polamalu, a walk-in Hall of Famer, and were like, we don't need you this year.
Just hang out.
Yeah. I think that's where, like, that's when you'll know. Like, if they draft a guy in the first round and you're like, there's nowhere for him to go. Like, to me, that's when you know, like, oh, all right, well, this team's pretty good. I don't think they're quite there yet. Like, I expect the guy that gets picked at 17 to play a lot this year. Where? I think they've done too good a job in free agency to pin them down. I also think there's a very good chance it's not at 17. I don't think Omar is going to sit there. If he sees the guy, if he sees the position he really wants going, he's going to move up. If he doesn't like the way the board sits, he's going to move down. I expect him to be extremely active in trading draft picks. If you look at what Philly has done over the years, Andy Weidl's influence on the team should be in that exact same vein. And so I would not be surprised at all if the pick is not made at 17. But if it is, I think Joey Porter Jr. to me is the player that I think is the most likely that is likely to be there that they would definitely like to have. You know, there are other guys that I hope will be there and they might want to take. There are guys they'll trade up to get. There might be boards where they trade down, but I think Joey Porter Jr. will probably be there at pick 17, and I think they would like to have him. And so if you want to pick like a favorite, I think that's a safe choice, but man, I wouldn't give it a high percentage. Like there's a lot of options there.
Well, that was going to be my next one. So is it's covering the wide receiver, or is it that wide receiver that was at Pitt, then he went to USC, and his former quarterback that he had so much success with is the guy under center for the Steelers. I know that his name. I don't expect him to be in the side of the top 10, right? I mean, you got to figure he's going to go pretty high on that board. Jordan Addison.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't have a great combine. I think he kind of fell down some boards. I think he got passed by Jackson Smith and Jigba from Ohio State, who had some injury concerns coming into the draft process, and he seemed to have answered all of those. So I don't know. I think he's probably the third wide receiver off the board to me. Will probably be there for the Steelers at 17 if they want him. I just don't think he fits what they don't have. I think if they want to draft a wide receiver, if they looking at the slot options, like they have some guys, they're not great, they're not proven, but I think they genuinely like Anthony Miller, who had a great training camp until he was injured last year. I think they're very excited to see what Calvin Austin can do. Those two guys are 5'8" and 5'10". Jordan Addison's 5'11". Like if you want it, I just don't. There's not a lot of sense to me in drafting another part that you already have. If you want to pick another slot receiver. And if you look at what the Steelers have done at slot receiver in the last 4 or 5 years, it's been a lot of Chase Claypool and Juju Smith-Schuster. Well, those are two of the biggest wide receivers in the NFL. So if they're going to draft a wide receiver, to me, I think it's going to be a big guy. I think it will not be Jordan Addison, or they could just draft another tight end. It is an extremely deep tight end class. Pat Freiermuth has struggled a little bit with inline blocking. I think that's been his one big downside. Well, you don't need him to inline block if you just draft another tight end and move him out, and there's your slot guy. I really like the idea of 2 tight end personnel for the Steelers in general. They want to run the ball. We talked about their weakness at tackle. Just seems to all fit together very nicely for me. So like a Darnell Washington or a Dalton Kincaid or somebody like that, I think may not be a crazy option either. But yeah, I would be a little bit surprised if it's Jordan Addison, especially at 17. Now, if they trade down from there, or maybe if he makes it to 32, I'd say all bets are off. That's a really good player at that point in the draft. But I would be a little surprised if he's the pick at 17.
Now, how big is the loss of Edmonds and Cam Sutton to this defense?
Well, I'm not sure we have the answer to that question yet. I think the biggest thing that I think will be missed about those two guys is their availability. They didn't miss a lot of football games over the last 5 years, and versatility. They're going to replace those two guys with about 4, I think. We've already seen it safety. They've got DeMonte KZ and Keanu Neal. And to me, that makes a little bit of sense, right? Whereas if you kind of put those two guys on an athletic spectrum, Terrell's kind of right in between them, right? He's faster than Neal, but he's not bigger. He's bigger than KZ, but he's not faster, right? So he's kind of like right in between. And I think a lot of the things that people consider downsides about Terrell Edmonds, especially early in his Pittsburgh career, is that it's just really hard to find one guy that can athletically do all the parts of the job that the Steelers were asking him to do. It's really hard to go run fit Derrick Henry and then the next game cover Keenan Allen in the slot, right? Like one guy is going to have a really hard time with that job, no matter which one guy you pick. Let's go find another Troy Polamalu. Like they're just not around. I think they've sort of acknowledged that, and now we got 2 guys, right? We got a cover version of Terrell, and we've got a run stopping in the box version of Terrell. I think you see the same thing with Cam Sutton, right? Cam Sutton played inside, outside, pure coverage, not much of a run stopping guy, but could kind of do it all in the secondary. Well, Patrick Peterson to me is going to provide almost everything that Cam Sutton did as far as an outside corner. He's not as versatile, though. We're not going to see him come into the slot to go pick up Tyler Boyd, a Keenan Allen, a guy like that. They're probably going to have to go find another one of those. They're going to need to replace Cam Sutton with Patrick Peterson and somebody. Maybe it's somebody we hear called in this draft, like an Emmanuel Forbes or a Clark Phillips or someone like that. If those pieces all fit together the way we think they will, and those guys stay healthy, I think they won't miss them that much. But that's still a very open question at this point. And the one thing that you get when you have a very, very available guys, the thing about those two guys is that it's always easier to find the little piece if you have the big part. It's like baseball with a platoon, right? If you're the right-handed hitting part of a platoon, then you're basically useless. Like you're completely interchangeable here, right? It's the lefty side that everybody wants. It's the guy that can play the big minutes that can do it over and over again. That's the more difficult thing to find. So I mean, Neal's had some injury issues. KZ's had some injury issues. Peterson is way up there in age. Like to me, I think they're piecing this together in a way that makes sense, but it's certainly not a sure thing to be better than what they had.
So you don't think that Omar is done free agency wise?
I don't know if it'll be. I think we'll probably be surprised if we see like another big name. But look, I mean, they brought in Larry Ogunjobi late in the process last year, brought in Malik Reed on a late season trade late in the process last year. No, I don't think they're done. I think we'll see more additions, and I think that's been their MO actually for a while, is that they kind of enjoy. If you think back, Ryan Switzer came over late in training camp. Vance McDonald came over late in training camp. That's been a pretty consistent theme for them for a few years, where they're willing to make those moves even right up until the very end if they think they can make the team better. So no, I wouldn't say they're done at all.
Now I got to ask, because as a Steeler guy, we don't miss a game. Guy calling plays. He came under some scrutiny this season. I think at one point somebody said that he could come down and coach our midget football program because we only have 7 plays and they're perfect for him. What do you feel is it Matt Canada, or is it just kind of he was getting into place with a new quarterback again? Is that, and keeping him, was that to keep Kenny Pickett consistent and not changing coordinators on him into his second season? And do you think that he'll make it through the contract?
Well, okay. I've known Matt for a while. I covered him when he was at Pitt in 2016. And I feel like I have a very good understanding of what he's trying to do on offense. It is a running offense. It is meant to run the football. All of the things that you think of as sort of hallmarks of a Matt Canada offense, jet sweeps, pre-snap motions and shifts, unbalanced lines, weird formations, all of that is for the running game. None of that has anything to do with the passing game. When the Steelers were looking for their next offensive coordinator, and they knew that offensive coordinator was going to be the offensive coordinator that took them into the scary future beyond Ben Roethlisberger, I think someone with a creative running attack made sense for them. Right? They went out and drafted Najee Harris. They got an offensive coordinator with an innovative running attack. And I believe the plan was for them to be a running team, to make that their signature in the post Ben era. They were going to be drafting late in the draft. This is not a team that has plans on being bad. They could not expect to get a highly regarded quarterback at any point. And so I think they made plans to live life without it. If you look at Matt Canada's college offenses, even the best ones, not a lot of star power at the quarterback position. However, a few stars are running back. Had some good ones. And so I think that it was the idea. And I think it was a reasonable idea. There's a lot of people that didn't like the hire when it was made. I didn't have a problem with it. I thought it was a sound plan. It didn't work for a couple of reasons. One of them is that the offensive line has been so bad that they haven't been able to run the ball, even though they wanted to. That was a big part of it. The second part of it, though, was that Kenny Pickett falls into their lap. Right. We talk about the draft and how the Steelers are very predictable in the draft generally. And everyone, I'll talk about their tendencies and people are like, oh, it's a smokescreen. Like, Steelers don't really do that. And like people say, what about Malik Willis? Well, they had all this interest. Like, yeah, they had all this interest because they thought Kenny Pickett was going 10 picks before them. Of course they were interested in Malik Willis. Then just the happenstance occurs above them. I'll tell you this. The New Orleans Saints were right ahead of the Steelers. Kenny Pickett thought he was going to be a Saint. Like, the Steelers thought he was going to be a Saint. So they did not expect him to be there. When that happened, I think the plan had to change. You now have a first-round quarterback that needs to be, first of all, has the talent to throw. So, okay, we're going to try to throw the ball a little bit, and needs to be nourished and encouraged, in a certain fashion. I'm not sure that Matt Canada is the right guy for that job. He's never done it before. So I don't even know how he could be sure he's the right guy for that job. Okay. And even if he is, I just think he was not prepared for the way that the plan changed in the 2022 season, and that they did not have a passing offense that was built to make the most out of Kenny Pickett's talent. They had your seventh graders, right? That's what they, from a passing standpoint, what they had was very simple. Now the run offense is extremely complicated, but the passing stuff is very basic. That was intentional. I'm not going to sit here and say that Matt can't come up with a good passing offense, but he certainly wasn't even trying to last year. And so, and we saw that, right? The whole world saw it. And so I am interested and curious to see what he can come up with. Glenn Thomas is a new hire on the offensive staff, has a bit of an air raid background, also worked for Matt Rule in the past. So like a couple of different creative, what I would call creative passing offensive influences. I think something like that's good. I would be not opposed to more of that if they want to hire somebody like Byron Leftwich, Mark Whipple, some guys that had a little bit more success doing this in the NFL. I think that's what's missing from the Steelers offensive coaching staff right now is guys that have been there and done that. It's really hard to lead the way when you haven't been there before. And I think it's asking a lot of Matt Canada to be that for Kenny Pickett right now. And I think that's been, part of the source of the frustration, but it does not help Kenny any to just rip the whole playbook out from his hands in year one either. I think even if I had decided after his first year that I did not want to keep Matt Canada as coordinator, I think the idea of, all right, well, let's find some of these bat rule concepts and let's find some of these air raid concepts. Let's work them into our offense this year, and let's make Kenny a little bit more well-rounded quarterback this year. And then if it doesn't work out with Matt now next year, it's not going to be a shock to his system if we bring in another offensive coordinator that does something completely different. He will have, built up an understanding of multiple different concepts and just be able to deal with it.
So are you comfortable enough to put an end to the rumors that we're going to see 7 up there in the booth calling the offense? Because if you go down Twitter, every time Matt Canada's name comes up, there's 3 or 4, and I'm going to use the Pittsburgh word. There's 3 or 4 jagoffs that you got to hear them say, well, you know what? If we could just get 7 up there in the booth, everything would be great. I don't know if that's the answer.
Well, okay. I mean, there's a couple of things here, and I'm glad you asked me this because I get this a lot, and so I'm glad to go here. For one, first of all, I think if Ben came out and made an announcement and said, "I want to get into coaching. I'm going to be the whatever coordinator, quarterbacks coach of here, and I'm going to be at practice every day, and I'm going to be fully involved and pour my whole self into this process, and early mornings and late nights and the whole 9 yards." I think his wife might kill him. I think that we might have a domestic assault situation up there in the North Hills. I mean, I'm kidding, obviously, but look, I mean, the guy just did that for 17 years. His kids are young. Like, I think he wants to be there for them, and I think he's been around pro football long enough to know that you can't fake it. You can't halfway it. You got to be either all in or all out, and I don't see him as a guy right now that would be willing to be all in based on where his family life is right now. Maybe in the future that might change. He also certainly doesn't need the money. So, I mean, what's he doing it for? Like, where is the big drive to get Ben Roethlisberger to go to work for 14 hours every day? I don't know. If I'm him, I'm like, that sounds horrible. I don't want to do that.
I'm cool.
Okay. The second part about this is, I don't want to say that Ben can't be a good coach. I don't have any idea if he would be a good coach. But if we are just basing it on the way he played, in which his favorite play was, I don't know, get open and I'll figure it out. That to me does not scream future head coach. Like, you want to come to me and be like, Josh Dobbs, quarterback coach. I'm like, all right, like I can see this. Like, okay,
rocket scientist,
he's an intellectual guy. He was the first guy when Ben would come to the sidelines with the clipboard and the iPad and showing him pictures and drawing stuff, and that was not Ben at all, ever at any point. No, it was just keep going. Gotcha. Like that was all it was. And so, like, listen, I'm not minimalizing him mentally to say that, like, he couldn't do it, but I don't know what about watching him play scream to anyone like, well, this guy's obviously a future coach. Like, maybe he can do it, but I don't know why everybody immediately goes there. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, and people forget the year that he was hurt. The meme that went around for months of him with a headset on, and it wasn't even plugged into anything. So, like, we're going to say that Ben's just going to decide to take the headset off and go, hey, come here, I'm going to draw this in the sand, and you're going to go out there. I used to do it all the time. You'll be fine, kid.
Did you try telling him to get open? Yeah.
Did you point? You forgot to point? Oh, next time, point. Last question. I wrap up every show this way. Is there a question that you were expecting? And if so, how would you have answered it?
Wait, was there a question that I was expecting?
Was there a question from me that you were expecting? And if so, how would you have answered it?
No, I don't think there was a question I was expecting. I try to live life without expectations. Clint Hurdle taught me this. Man, I wish I could remember his exact quote, because Clint Hurdle had like a witty saying for everything in the world. But the gist of it is that expectations lead to disappointment, right? Like if you don't have any expectations, you can't be upset about what happens. And I feel like that was a solid message from the old ball coach. I liked Clint's mental approach to life. A guy that I had a lot of respect for, who was a first round pick and, a big shot, and then was a failed prospect and an alcoholic, and reinvented himself as a professional and as a person, and found his way to some great success later in his career. He was always a person that when I was covering, I felt like I learned a lot from. And so expectations cause disappointment is one of those things that I've tried to live by. And so I didn't have any. I don't feel like I've been disappointed. You've exceeded my lack of expectations at every turn. And that's all I got.
Well, I appreciate that. That's nice. That's probably the nicest thing that's been said on this show about me as the host. So thank you very much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the draft tonight. You sticking around with us, I'm going to send it to Serenity Brown with the editorial. She's going to tell me all the things that I did wrong, which where there were plenty, and she'll find them during editing. But this has been Alan Saunders. It's draft day. Make sure you catch tonight, and we'll be right back, Chuckleheads. What's going on, Chuckleheads, and welcome back. I am Carlo Guadagnino. This is the editorial with Serenity Brown. That's Serenity Brown. Before we get started, I need to make some comments about last week's editorial. I misspoke. Not in my first pick. The Sopranos is the greatest show that's ever been created. Number 2, I was introduced a couple weeks ago to Grey's Anatomy, and that's all we have watched for the better half of a month now. And it all started because I saw a TikTok about burr holes, and now I'm hooked. So that's my number 2. And
I also guess I have to say that I misspoke too, because Vampire Diaries is not supposed to be on the list. Mine was supposed to be Supernatural. Very graciously reminded me of that after we stopped recording.
And last week was a great time. This week, however, it's draft day. Mm-hmm. I had a lot of fun talking with Alan. Not just about the draft, but about Pitt football and Pitt basketball, and it's just nice to talk to a guy from that side of town. That side of Pittsburgh. It's just different. But what did you think this week?
I think it was a good episode. There was times where I was like, "Whoa, he spoke real fast." It never got to a point where it was so fast that I couldn't understand him. I couldn't understand him because I don't know what the hell you guys were talking about, but it wasn't because of the speed. Yeah.
It'd be that way. It do be doing. I thought there were a couple points that I found really interesting. One, before we get to the draft stuff, the conversation about Pitt football and about Pitt basketball, and where the basketball team, where they were having their struggles, and why he didn't just say, they brought in guys that didn't mesh well. He explained that, yes, Coach Capel brought in really good players, they just weren't able to bridge their dislike for each other for the better good of the team. I also thought it was interesting him talking about the Pitt defense is going to lose D-line all the way back to safety, and D-line's not really a concern where we're going to worry about, because, obviously Pitt puts out a lot of talent from that front four. And then, his draft special part was interesting, because things have happened even since that recording that maybe have changed where the Steelers will go tonight. They went out and got themselves a receiver and a 7th round pick, and really just moved down a couple picks, flip-flopping with the Rams. This means nothing to you, but I'm very excited for tonight. I think the Steelers are in a position where they can draft for the future
Now, when we say tonight, do we mean tonight or tonight when the show comes out?
Tonight when the show comes out.
All right, cool.
Yeah. Which is Thursday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now
you see, this is a teaching moment here.
Sure.
So when we do this, sometimes we do it the night before, sometimes we do it like on a Monday.
I was just making sure.
They don't know when we recorded this. So when I say like tonight, we're referring to the day that the episode is coming out. So, you know, for the next time, this is the editorial, so we're working this out. So for the next time, just like keep that in mind of triple checking.
Quadruple.
You can't triple check a double check. So top 3 musicals.
Chicago. Sorry, I make noises sometimes.
We literally just watched a musical.
Yesterday, I know,
Chicago, but you can't think of 2 other ones that you really enjoy? Or are you trying not to say Hamilton because it's so new that you don't want to get bashed by our 15 viewers that, oh my God, she pointed that out because it just came out.
I'll put Hamilton in there, and then probably I'm gonna say this one because I went to see it on Broadway and it was cool. It made me cry. Finding Neverland.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Why did it make you cry? It was just that good.
It was sad.
It was just...
Yeah, but it was also really good.
Oh, okay. My 3 would probably be West Side Story, number 1. Grease. Because loves me some Olivia Newton-John and John Travolta.
Mm-hmm.
And the 3rd one's tough.
Just say Hamilton.
I don't think I will.
Just
say
it.
I don't think I will.
Just say it.
I don't think I will.
It's true.
It's not true. It's not. It's in my top 5. It's not my top 3.
Says the man who listens to the soundtrack on repeat.
Listen, that shit'll get you through a day. I promise you, it'll get you through a day. Same thing as listening to Bo. It gets you through a day.
Yeah.
Before we get away, thank you to everybody that continues to watch. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button. If you're listening, do the same thing, but it's a little bell. It's not a like button. Just get the notifications. Although I think you can give me a thumbs up, right? You can give the show a thumbs up.
I think so.
On Spotify, Apple, wherever else you listen to your podcast. If you want to follow us on the social medias, it's TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. The only one that's different is Instagram. It's dingo_talk. And because it's draft day, and because my buddy would be 65 this year, and we would be watching the game at ye old Bubba's Bison Inn, I think that's how we're going to enjoy the draft. Happy birthday, Chuck, and we'll catch you next week, Chuckleheads.
So what's your 3rd? You didn't say it.
You're right, I did.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Dingo Talk. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. For more info and to contact the show, you can find us on Twitter @DingoTalk.